The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spin-Off with help from Callaghan Innovation. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
This episode is the last week of this podcast. We're now going to take a little bit of time off and come back with a new concept, still around all the cool and interesting things in business now, Aotearoa, and still sharing diverse and personal stories of the human side of business, innovation, and ideas. It's been an enormous privilege, but we think that now, after 5 years, more than 200 episodes, and more than 500,000 downloads, we hope we've proven that business is not boring. And so maybe fittingly, this week's guest is not only emblematic of so many of the things we've been interested in on this podcast, but for the last Business is Boring, the business is boring. Boring Oat Milk is the new oat milk company from founder Morgan Maw, and it does so many things we love. It's adding brand and IP to a primary industry, it's helping us move past commodities, it's better on the environment, it's telling its story through great design, and it's an innovation serving a big future market. Oat milk is super popular, with shortages caused by COVID earlier this year bringing attention to the fact that although we grow plenty of oats here and know a thing or two about milk, we were importing all commercial oat milk. It's bananas. And Morgan was in a place to do something about it, knowing oats through her first oat biscuit venture. To talk the 3-year journey she had to go on to get onto shelves, the state of the oat and alt milk industry here, how she's using brand and storytelling, and what's next, Morgan joins us now by Zoom. Tēnā koe, thank you for being here today, Morgan.
Kia ora, Simon. I have to say it's such a privilege to be on this last episode. I, like many others, have been an avid listener of Business is Boring over the years, and you guys have done such an incredible job on the podcast, so thank you.
That's so cool. And yeah, we'll be back with something a bit changed up soon. So hopefully not going away completely. So take us back to your story. What led you to oat milk? And what led you first, I guess, to those oat biscuits?
I guess what led me first to oat milk was I was doing another oat-based brand called Bonnie, and we made biscuits and oat cakes, and I was in it for all the same reasons that I'm in business today, which is to grow more of oats, which are a really, sustainable grain. But Bonnie was a really tough gig. It was classic grassroots beginning. I baked nights in the Ponsonby Community Centre kitchen, and my husband Nick would come in after his 9 till 5 and help package into the night, and then we'd sell at the Lascaux markets. And that business grew slowly, and we moved into bigger production spaces and got more stockists, and learned more about the supermarket game and how to run a small business. It was a really good training ground for what I'm doing now. But after about 4 years of doing Bonnie, I realised that, my fancy $7 oat crackers weren't really going to push the needle in terms of growing demand for oats in New Zealand. And so I, looked at what is a product that people have every single day that then can have more impact on the land. And that's when I stumbled across oat milk.
And is that a hard thing to do? Because, your business is your baby, right? Like, or your child or pet or whatever. Like, it's something you really care for and you've brought into the world and you've looked after and you've fought all these battles for. And was it easy to make a decision to walk away from Bonnie that was, in nice supermarkets and being purchased and a real thing?
Yeah, well, the plan wasn't actually to walk away from it. The plan was to have it going concurrently. But I realised, we'd outgrown our space, our production space. We needed to buy a whole lot more equipment. And I realised that, manufacturing just wasn't for me. I was interested in more like the supply side, understanding the oats and the farming, and then also the brand and marketing it. So, that sort of middle part, the manufacturing, which was really important, I just wasn't interested in. And so I looked to get those oat cakes and biscuits contract manufactured. And we actually started out with a contract manufacturer, and I just made all of the mistakes, like didn't do our due diligence properly. And within a couple of months, they just couldn't make them properly, or they couldn't make them to the price that they thought they would. And so it just all went to custard. Like they started sending us, invoices for miscellaneous costs that they just sort of explained, they were just additional costs, and we just couldn't afford it. And they ended up taking us to Bay Corp like 2 days before Christmas. And so we just had to pull the pin. We couldn't find anyone else to make them. So it was actually quite a bit of a tragic end to Bonnie. So I still kind of hold hope that one day we could start it back up. But yeah, I wasn't intending on stopping it completely, but, business is tough. It's what happened.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting. And it is so tough. And it's so hard to often to kind of like talk about those things too, because, in this podcast is part of both the problem and the solution of that, and that, kind of the journey is fetishized and everything kind of comes up rosy and stuff. And we talk to people who've made it more often than people who haven't made it on things. But every business person also, when you ask them when things have been tough, they've got a story of something, either nearly completely falling over or having to make that massive change. And yeah, like having those right suppliers who really care and are invested in your success and are really good at what they do is just so key.
Oh, it's so important. It's so critical. Like I learned a lot from that business, and it was a lot from making mistakes, which, now that we've, seemingly doing well, it's all fine. And you're right. Like people like hearing about the tough road once you've done well. And so it's a funny place to be in now that we've got this product that's out, and I can talk about it with sort of more confidence than what I probably would have a year ago. So yeah, but honestly, the relationships that you have with every single person along your supply chain is so important, and everyone you do business with. So now I have a no dickhead policy.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can spot them now. So I'm quite rigorous with the people I do business with.
Oh, I love it. I've in my own business, we've had suppliers who were lovely people who were just no good. And then, we were making these hand creams, and, we got a run of 500 and about 450 had labels that were sideways. One label was upside down, labels were missing. And we're just like, we can't supply these to anyone. I don't know what we're meant to do. And they were lovely, but just not up to it. And then in terms of that kind of, there was this great quote I saw from the designer of the I Love New York logo, and he looked back on his career and said that the only good work he'd ever done that he really loved and was proud of was when he worked with people who he shared the same values with and liked. And that's, no dickheads.
Yeah, no, that's really, really important. And that's like, throughout the sort of journey of, especially with this oat milk and with investors and the likes, like finding people whose values are aligned with your own is just like absolutely critical. And you don't find that out in your first meeting. It's kind of like dating, the first 2, 3, 4, 5 dates are fine and great and everyone's on their best behavior. But it's once you get into the trenches and the nitty gritty that the true colors show. And so it's just really important to kind of do the time. And I think with a startup, you're so, you're working off such small resources. You're trying to move quickly because of that fact. You often kind of move too quickly over really big decisions. And so it is really critical that you kind of do take the time to get to know people and really understand where their drivers are, and understand their business as well, because, you know, you have your own ambitions, and so do other businesses too that you've got to work with. So, yeah.
And tell me about the kind of like the oat situation in New Zealand, as it's kind of wild that we haven't had, commercially made oat milk here before what you've done, and that you've had to build out so much of the system in a country that is kind of, a big primary producer.
Yeah, a country that's made for it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so just talking about oats, I mean, oats we grow really well here. You know, they were introduced by Scottish immigrants in the mid-1800s, and they found that the oats, in Southland and Otago down south, it had similar conditions to what was required for oats. So you need like long daylight hours, and you need a lot of rain. So we're good at that in the South Island especially. But, we currently grow 33,000 tonnes of oats, half of which is used for animal feed. So there's plenty of scope there. But oats are really good, really, really good and gentle for the soil, because they are really nitrogen hungry. So they soak up lots of nitrates, which, in New Zealand, with a lot of intensive farming, our soils are really heavy in. So that's the situation there. But yeah, I mean, all of oat milk that's sold in New Zealand is imported. And 90% of plant milks that are sold in New Zealand are imported. So it really makes, for me as a consumer, as well as, oat lover, it just really made no sense. Like as you said, we're a, farming nation, and we've got a lot of manufacturing capability in stainless steel. So, I kind of came at it at the same angle that you have, is like, it makes no sense. Why isn't anyone doing it?
And then, I guess let's go through the journey of how you got there in a second, but kind of like, so all of it's being imported pretty much, and then that's coming, a lot of it, from Sweden. Why on earth is Sweden such a kind of oat milk centre of excellence?
Yeah. I mean, Sweden is like the home of oat milk. They pioneered it. They developed it in the 90s. So it was first developed in the 90s by food scientists out of Lund University. And it was developed as an alternative for those that were lactose intolerant. And the creator of oat milk actually then went on to found Oatly. And, I think it's big there solely because of Oatly and the IP that was created by turning oats into oat milk, because nobody else knew how to do it at that stage. And, a number of businesses have popped up in recent years, started from former employees of Oatly to help others, like including New Zealand companies, make their own oat milk. But another reason I think why it worked, why it's so big in Sweden, is that Sweden's the home of Tetra Pak. And, the development of Tetra Pak, which is like for your listeners, it's like the cardboard cartons that you see all your long life milk in plant milks. And Tetra Pak opens up huge opportunities for products that otherwise would have had to be chilled and have a short shelf life. And so Tetra Pak is like what they call aseptic packaging, which just means really sterile, and it gives you the ability to package things like milk and plant milk into them and give them a long shelf life. So I think it was a combination of the two of it being developed there 30 years ago to then also being the home of Tetra Pak, this perfect vehicle to give it long life that has meant that they've been the leaders.
Yeah, I love it. And that, the Tetra Pak owners were, at points in the last 20 years, like the richest people in the world and stuff. Hey, like it's it's so funny that Sweden has these these niche but incredibly successful things, and there's no reason that New Zealand can't have industries and niche successes like these.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people make good money out of packaging.
Yeah. And in terms of how it's made, like, the question always comes up, people are always asking, how do you milk an almond or how do you milk an oat? How do you actually make oat milk at a commercial scale? Because I'm sure people have kind of made some form of oat milks in homes for time.
Yeah. People have made oat milks in homes, and people have also made, there have been New Zealand brands that have came out and made oat milk in like pilot plants. So really small scale plants that are like Food South and Food Bowl, which you make about 500 litres a day, which in comparison, like we can make like 70,000 litres a day. So how you milk an oat is you get oats and you add them in with warm water and into a giant tank, and then they get milled. So they go through a mill to mill them down. And then enzymes are added. And so enzymes are natural, it's kind of like what happens when you eat oats or say something really carby like breads, and the enzymes in your mouth and your stomach break down the starches and release the sugars. So we're doing that beforehand, and that's to get out the nice sort of sugar flavour and to give it good viscosity as well. And then it goes through a decanter, which separates the solid from the liquid. And then what we have there, the liquid, is what we call the oat base, and that's like a concentrated oat base. And it's kind of quite like sweet. It's sort of like a thick, yummy smoothie. And then the solid is what we currently just sell off for animal feed. But we are looking to convert that into a plant protein because it's actually really high in protein. Because unfortunately, during the process, that like all the protein goes into that solid, that base. So we're looking at ways to convert that. But what we've got then with the liquid is this oat base. And for us, we then put that in a tanker, a milk tanker, and send it, 1,500 meters down the road. But say plants in Sweden, they would already have all that process in the same factory. And so we send it down the road, it gets added into more big tanks, and all the other ingredients get added to it. So typically in oat milk, you have an oil. So we use high oleic sunflower oil, and ours is from Canterbury. And it's that's to give it good body, like the fat gives it good body, and it helps it froth with coffee. And it helps it sort of stopping it from separating. So you can imagine like this sort of oil suspends it. And then you add the other nutrients and vitamins. So like the vitamin B12, B2 and calcium and some sea salt just to give it a bit of flavour. And then it goes through the UHT line. So it's like 15 seconds. It goes through an ultra heat treatment, and then it goes through a homogenizer, and then it's bottled. But it's actually quite boring. So, yeah.
And all of those things are things that are done as, an extraordinary matter of course in terms of fruit juice or milk, obviously.
Correct. Yeah.
Yet there was absolutely no infrastructure set up to do it commercially for oats. How did you go about getting that infrastructure? And did you initially think, I'll just make some oat milk, it won't be too hard?
Oh, yeah, I think everyone thinks that when they start their own business, People make a batch of cookies at home and they're like, this is so easy, these are so yum, I'm going to sell them. But I always have a bit of a word of warning of people like, don't turn your passion into your job, because do you really love it enough to do it day in, day out, like, 16 hours a day? But with oat milk, I thought the same thing. And I went and spoke to pretty much every single UHT manufacturer in New Zealand and said to them, will you make oat milk? And they all said to me the same thing. Yeah, but yes, maybe, but we can only handle liquid. So you deliver us the kind of oat base and we can do the rest of it and UHT it for you. So I just thought the same thing as what you've just said is, there's plenty of people making apple juice and orange juice and the likes, and they're having to have the same challenges where they've got a product that they've then got to get done into liquid form. And so I went and spoke to these guys that were making apple juice and concentrate, and said to them, would you look to make oat base? And they were interested, but they were kind of like, yes, but it's all on you. Like, you've got to bring the expertise, you've got to pay for it. We'll just let you use our kit. And so I was lucky enough to have a beverage technologist / processing engineer who had 30 years experience working for Danone and Frucor and the likes. And she came on this journey with me. And and she said actually in her 30 years experience, this is top 2 hardest projects she's ever worked on. And that is just because even though they had a lot of the right equipment, it wasn't quite right. So we had to order in new bits of kit. And as well, like nobody had the expertise around understanding how to process these oats. And so, you think of oats and water, and especially warm water, as just clogs up pipes. It's like porridge. And so we just had to figure a way to unclog those pipes and get it flowing.
It's set so hard. And it is like a glue. Like how did people react when you came in and said, hey, I want to make this oat milk, and they hadn't done it before? Were people supportive of you? Did you have to go through a bunch of manufacturers first who maybe didn't think it was a good idea? How many doors did you have to knock on? And did you have to convince people?
Yeah, a lot. A lot of doors I knocked on. And for the most part, New Zealanders are a pretty open bunch and were willing to help. And a lot of people wanted this to work, from growers to manufacturers to like the industry. And I think people worked with me, I guess, like because they could see my drive and that I wasn't giving up. But we did, before we found our manufacturer we're working with now, we talked to a manufacturer for about 9 months, and they were sort of one of the bigger dairy companies. We talked to them for 9 months, and I looked back through and I had like 30 meetings with them. And we did a lot of work, and it ended up being a no. So that was pretty devastating. But there's obviously like the naysayers who questioned like why I was the one that was doing it, because a lot of people said, if it was such a thing, then the big companies would have already done it.
Especially the big milk companies, like, who have the UHT lines and have all of the kit ready to go. Yeah. And, it couldn't hurt to diversify away from something that, we're kind of a peak cow.
Yes. And I think they're realising that now, but as with all these, name the dairy company and I would have spoken to them, but they just weren't ready like 2 or 3 years ago, even 1 year ago, whereas now I think they're all sort of scrambling to see what they can do. And I honestly do believe that within the next few years, we will see the dairy companies rolling out with a plant with oat milk, because it's what's happening overseas. There's a company in the US just out of New York called Elmhurst, and they're like 90 years old. And in 2000, they were an old dairy company. In 2017, they converted everything to plant milk. So they're now solely just doing plant milk, which is a pretty massive transition. And I don't see that full 180 happening. But I definitely think that the dairy companies will be doing plant milk soon.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the environmental kind of situation around oat milk in New Zealand. So, what's the kind of difference and impact compared to animal milk, cow milk?
Oh, it's huge compared to cow milk. Okay, so first of all, you think about it. So there's 11 times less land use for oat milk compared to cow, 13 times less water, 3.5 times less gas emissions, and 6 times less fertilizer. So that's just, dairy milk. And then if you look at the other plant milks and, almond, which is the biggest in the world, like 60% of plant milk that's sold is almond milk. And, almonds use 7 times more water than what oat is. And, 80% of almonds grown in the world are from California, which is a drought-stricken state. And then, oat also has less emissions than soy and rice. So it's sort of, that's why often oat is so popular, is because of its environmental credentials. But yeah, definitely, in comparison to dairy, I think a lot of things do pretty well.
Yeah. And, other well-known milk alternatives like soy milk or almond, I was really upset when I found out how much sugar most almond milk has, and also just how bad it is in terms of water usage and environmental impact. Are there any kind of, skeletons lurking in the oat milk closet?
Oh, well, I think, to be honest, there kind of was. That's been dealt to. But the issue with oats is that they are typically, especially in America, are a crop that uses a lot of glyphosate, which is Roundup. And so what farmers would do is that just before harvest, they'll spray Roundup. It's kind of naughty, but they'd spray Roundup on the crop, which dries out the crop because it's killing it, dries out the crop, and then they'll come through with the combine harvester the next day and harvest it. So it's really easy to harvest, so it's nice and dry. And but what you have is you've got like Roundup residue on your plant, and which is not good. You know, it's been linked to like cancer. It's a horrific spray. And so I had always been on at our supplier to like get their farmers to stop using Roundup, and because we were finding traces of it. And this is back when I was doing Bonnie, and the old sort of CEO of this company was just like, no, it's what's practical for farmers. We can't tell farmers what to do. So what I actually did was I was like so fed up with it that I went out and found my own farmers and went and grew 200 tonne of oats so that I would have Roundup-free oats and ready for my oat milk launch. But what happened is I had these oats, but I had nowhere to kind of process them. So like with oats, if you think about them, they've got the husk on them, so you need to dehusk them, and you need to kiln them and roast them to get out that sort of green flavour and give it a nice toasty flavour. So I needed to do that, and I'd kind of cut off my options by telling the supplier that I wasn't buying their oats. So I couldn't use their kit. So I went and found I actually haven't told anyone this, but I went and found a guy who was malting barley for beer, and he was down in Dunsandel. And I went and said, you're dehulling your barley and you're kilning it and roasting it. Surely it must be the same thing. So I sent like a ton of oats to him to trial it out, and he dehulled it with his barley, dehuller. And I mean, it wasn't great. And then he kilned them and roasted them. And it just turns out like it was a lot more complex than what we ever imagined, because the oats essentially kind of had this nice, beautiful, crispy brown exterior, but the inside was just green. So it just tasted like grassy as. And so we realised it was going to be a lot of work. And I spoke to my technologist, and she's like, Morgan, like you've bitten off more than you can chew. Like this is a lot of work. And then so I went back to the supplier and I said, look, and by this stage they had a new CEO. And I said to him, hey, really nice to meet you. Look, I've got 200 tonne of oats. Could you process it for me? Can you help me? And he was like, I don't think that sounds I think that sounds doable, but let me talk to the board. And I knew I was in trouble then because I knew the board would say no. And sure enough, they said no. But what they did say was that they would introduce a clause into their supply agreement that would say there were to be no traces of Roundup residue on the plant. So although they ended up just buying that 200 tonne of oats off me, they wouldn't process it for me because I was kind of undercutting them. They have now got it into their supply agreement. So yes, to answer your question, there were skeletons in the closet, but we've now solved it. But it was a lot of work, and it took a while to get there.
Oh, I love it. And I love that insight into what it takes to make something new happen in a place where everyone just defaults to what's always been done. And we'll be back in just a moment more to hear more from Morgan Maw about how she brought Boring Oat Milk to market.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. As we find ourselves navigating a new outbreak and lockdown, everyone here at The Spinoff remains committed to bringing you quality independent journalism, which, of course, includes our coverage of COVID-19. It's not an exaggeration to say we couldn't do this work without the generous support of our members. So, if you'd like to help us keep Aotearoa informed, please visit thespinoff.co.nz/members for more details and to donate today.
Yeah, absolutely love it. That's such a great illustration of how much work goes in to making something new. And alongside this, actually building out a new production method and a new kind of product line and a new ingredient source and a new, like all of these steps. Yeah. You were also making a brand and a business. Tell me about kind of, how you got the investment and supporters behind you to go through this, and and about that kind of the storytelling and the branding part. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of factors in this, and I think that when anybody is starting a business, you want everything to be perfect. And what I have realized is it is a journey, and you can't let perfect get in the way of good. Like, I love that quote so much, because I think, for me, I would love to have full traceability back to the farm, but I currently don't have that. So I just have to make do with what I've got, which is, Roundup free oats. So that's the best that I can do for now, but we're working towards it. But in terms of finding people to invest in this, it has been a hell of a journey. And I've had 2 investment partners before we've come to our 3rd and final one. And so when we started out, I met with a new private equity company that sort of saw what Oatly was doing overseas, and we're like, yeah, we'd love a bit of that. But I don't think they really realised, and neither did I actually, just how difficult it would be, and that it was essentially a feasibility study when it first started out. So they sort of realised that their money was just going into this absolute sinkhole, and they weren't, private equity. They're interested in the return, like they're kind of interested in the purpose on, at the dinner parties, chats, but not when it comes down to the balance sheet. So we parted ways, and I had this. I had an interesting time, when you're kind of in between investors, which essentially is like in between jobs, which means you just don't have anyone and don't have any money. And then I met another investment group, and again, they're really excited by it, but then they sort of realised just how expensive it was to do manufacturing in New Zealand, and they wanted to take it offshore to Asia, and that was just a non-negotiable for me. So, so we finally found our new partner, which and this was about 5 months ago, or even 4 months ago, so not that long ago. There's been plenty of times where I've thought that this wasn't actually going to happen. I was without an investor, going back out to pitch, and I met with my manufacturer, the Apple Press, and we'd had all these trials, and these trials are expensive, they're like 15 to 20K. They're a lot of money. And I was racking up the costs, and I said to them, I'm good for it, I promise. I just don't really have the money or the investment right now. And they turned around and they were like, well, what about us? Like, we'd be really interested in investing. So we met partners through them. But on the brand front, brand is really important, obviously, and especially in with FMCG being such a noisy space, and brands falling over themselves to tell consumers how great they are. We knew we had to go a different route. So we actually worked with Calvin So and his team from DMY. We met with him to discuss a project about 2.5 years ago. And we wanted to engage a designer early on because we're quite brand nerds. And we realized the importance of a good brand to stand out. But Boring is a nod to New Zealand's self-deprecating humour. When we were writing the copy for the website, and even recently with social media, we're often thinking of we channel Flight of the Conchords and Jermaine Clement, and we just think, what would Jermaine say? But the crux of the brand is we looked at the product. What is it? It's milk. It's an everyday product. It's something that it's a supporting actor, not the star. It's your coffee that's exciting. It's your cereal that's exciting. But it's just kind of stable and reliable and everyday. And so, that's quite boring.
But yeah, there's this lovely tension in it between the accessibility and the fact it's that kind of, constant constant and reliable thing. But also it's really lovely and thoughtful and, nicely composed and kind of accessible but aspirational, and a sense of humour but not being too loud. It's really, really nicely composed.
Thank you. Yeah. A lot of like nothing was by accident, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's it's so awesome. And in terms of the storytelling, when you were running Bonnie Goods and making the oat cakes and oat biscuits, did you kind of fall in love with oats, or this kind of role of being kind of a storyteller and a popularizer of the space and being part of the industry? Did you ever expect that?
No, not at all. I think it's just when you talk about something enough, and then people sort of finally start to listen, right? To be honest, like for me, I mean, it's just so happened that it's oats because they are a really sustainable grain, but it could have been anything that was in this space that was good for the environment and good for New Zealand. I just saw that, oats are a commodity grain and they shouldn't be. It's, again, something that grows really well here, good for the environment, but also we can add, make into these really great value-add products. I think it's just sort of happened a little bit by chance that I've ended up being, the unofficial oat ambassador for New Zealand.
Yeah. And there are some parallels there with the way you were talking about the roasting and the husking and all the rest of it that made me think of coffee. And you've had kind of partnership with Supreme that you've had a relationship with in the past, hey, and also with the barista. Tell me about the role of kind of oat milk and the popularization that's come through that channel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, first and foremost, even though, again, oats are really sustainable, people buy it because it tastes good and it pairs really well with coffee. And so that's why, with all the major oat milk players around the world and us as well, is that you start by seeding through those food service cafe channels because it does pair really well. So it pairs well because it is creamy. It's got a higher pH, so it doesn't split with the coffee. That's what often plant milks are guilty of doing. You kind of have this, this sort of feathering effect. And so we knew that we were always going to develop like a barista version, which is just a more specialized version designed especially for coffee. And I've known the Coffee Supreme guys since I was like 19. I used to live in Wellington and went to Vic Uni, and that was my uni job. So I was just making coffees for, people living in Mount Cook, and would be bagging beans. And so it's been a kind of long and really beautiful relationship with those guys. And when I first started developing this, I would take them, me and Jackie, my technologist, would take them, our samples, and get them to trial it out on their machines. And they were, as with a lot of people, really supportive of this and wanting a New Zealand oat milk. But at the same time, just because I was their mate and knew them, they weren't sort of giving me any favours. They were really critical of the product, and so we wanted them to be. So we probably, I don't even know how many trials we had with them, probably about 30 different ones to get it right.
Yeah, wow. And where do you see the kind of, there's been enormous change in the industry in the last kind of, 5 to 10 years, right? And huge growth in the alternate milk category. Where do you see the industry in 10 years? Will it be kind of an unusual treat to put milk in coffee as opposed to the standby, Will it be like kind of people eating less meat but choosing to eat better? Where do you see it going? As it's certainly not completely normal that we're drinking, cow milk is actually plasma. So
Yes.
we're drinking cow plasma.
Yes, absolutely. I know. And it's not when people actually stand back and think about it.
Yeah.
I know, how odd. We are such a dairy nation in New Zealand, and we've almost become too good at dairy, too specialised, and that's what's led to the intensified farming and all the leaching into our waterways. But it is a really lucrative business, not really lucrative. It is a lucrative in comparison to the other farming. And so, in terms of just talking about the consumer, what I truly believe that it will become, more normalised, and that And it is already. And I think that oat milk especially is kind of the perfect gateway into plant milk, because it's like everybody's familiar with oats. It's not some sort of foreign fancy grain or seed, like almonds. A lot of people are like, oh, that's grown in sort of other places. But oats, like people are familiar with porridge. And so just thinking that as a milk, that's not too hard a concept to grasp. So it's been incredible, the feedback that we've had from people being like, I mean, it's funny, a lot of dairy milk drinkers, their biggest compliment is telling me that it tastes like dairy. I'm like, okay, thanks, I guess. It doesn't, but anyway. So yeah, I think like for them, that's their way of sort of validating it to themselves, that it kind of tastes like dairy, so it's okay. But yeah, I believe that we will become, again, as we're becoming more flexitarian and choosing more sustainable meats, and meats are now sort of and will be more weighted on their emissions. And so, it will become more expensive. It will become like, more exclusive sort of thing. And then plant-based there's a real opportunity there for it to get more into the mainstream. And, we're not just going to be able to do that ourselves. Like, we are a branded product and we're a small brand, so we're never going to be as financially accessible to consumers. So it's going to be once the big corporates come in and can actually help sort of get that processing cost down and make it more accessible for people. But yeah, I truly believe that there will come a time where, there are cafes that aren't just in Greyland that are selling a lot more plant milk than dairy.
And what advice would you have for someone who can see something that seems, like it's worked overseas, we can grow things, we're good at UHT, we're good at liquid and stainless steel vats. Like, it seems pretty obvious, but there were so many no's and it's been so hard. What would your advice be to someone who can see something that makes a lot of sense to them, but they're having a hard run?
The funny thing is, I've thought about this question a bit, because I've been given a lot of advice. And but what?
Oh, there's that great line, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. Yes. Well, yeah, God, I got a lot of advice anyway. And so, but the thing is, you pick and choose. You don't have to listen to it all. But my advice to people is actually, first and foremost, I tell people, don't do it. Don't do it. And the reason I say that is, if somebody tells you not to do something and that's enough to convince you not to do it, then you definitely shouldn't, because you are going to have a lot more challenges and it is going to be a lot harder than that. To sort of forge a path or do anything differently. Like Simon, you've been involved in a lot of businesses. Like, it is difficult, and you just have to be really prepared to sacrifice a lot and dig it in and push your ego to the side and not have a lot of money and all these things. So yeah, my advice to people is just kind of like really like stick with it. And if I tell you don't do it and that's enough to sway you, then you really shouldn't. Yeah, magic. And just as a final thought, what will success be for you, and what will success be for Boring Oat Milk?
Yeah, Success for me is seeing more more diversification of land in New Zealand. And so, in a few years' time, we're looking to convert 100,000 hectares of intensive farming into diversified land. And that's not just growing oats, by the way. Oats are a bigger part of, sort of the ecosystem. So it's growing other high-value grains and crops like, peas and green leafy veggies and stuff like that. So for me, it's about improving the biodiversity in our land in New Zealand, because currently, we're in a pretty dire position. But success for Boring Oat Milk, I guess, is, it's having a distinctly New Zealand brand that is recognised on the world stage. That'd be pretty special.
Yeah, that's magic. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story today. Magic, and really lovely to have it as the last one of the run, as it's so many of the things that are just so cool to see. So thanks for sharing your story. That's Morgan Maw of Boring Oat Milk.
Thanks, Simon.
Kia ora. Thank you very much to Te Aihe Butler for producing, and thanks to everyone for having us along. Just as a final note, thank you to everyone who's listened, who's shared the podcast, everyone who's got in touch, everyone who's talked to me about it and been a supporter. Thanks especially to Callaghan Innovation for starting it and backing it the whole way through, and to the spin-off for the support and the opportunity. It's been an enormous privilege and such a lucky thing to talk to an interesting person doing cool things every week for 5 years, and really looking forward to changing things up a bit and keep hopefully providing some value and help to share some of these great stories of business and ideas in Aotearoa. We'll keep you posted. Cheers.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. Brought to you by The Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.